The world's oceans are warmer than ever. The past month's been the hottest on record, with the average temperature reaching 21 degrees Celsius. Data from research institutes in the United States and Europe show record temperatures of 38 degrees off the coast of Florida. Waters in the North Atlantic near the North Pole are also much warmer than normal at this time of year. Scientists are unsure about the causes, but warn the effects will be felt across the world. Well, Martin Visbeck is an oceanographer at the GEOMAR Ocean Research Center in the German city of Kiel. Welcome to DW News. Can you explain what's happening here? Why are we getting these record temperatures all of a sudden?
Yes, thank you, Ben. I think, as you correctly said, what we're seeing is extremely warm temperatures, in particular the tropical Pacific, but also in the North Atlantic. And this is out of the ordinary. On the other hand, we as climate scientists have been forecasting warmer than normal temperatures over the last 20 years, because that is the clear fingerprint of global warming that we're now seeing unfold right now. These extreme temperatures are typically a combination of the slow global warming that we see around the world and some regional enhancements such as the El Niño phenomena in the Pacific, but also slower winds in the North Atlantic.
But did you have the slightest inkling that we were going to get something like 38 degrees off the coast of Florida? I mean, that's like walking into a hot tub.
That is like walking into a hot tub. We call these extreme events. And if you look at the last climate assessment report, the likelihood of extreme events happening in the next years to come was already assured by the scientists is very high. And now we're seeing it in action. So in some ways, what we're seeing right now is extremely warm temperatures. We've never seen them before. But as climate scientists, we knew that they were coming, maybe not as fast as they did, but it is something that is extraordinary on the one hand, but not unexpected, because we're seeing unabated climate warming.
OK, so the warnings were there. You mentioned the North Atlantic. What about the North Pole? What about polar regions? I mean, melting ice means rising waters.
Yes, so we're seeing a lot of warming in the North Atlantic, which is in the tropics. We were more expecting that with this El Niño phenomena happening. This would be an extremely warm year. In the North Atlantic, less so. In the polar regions, we see now a warming of the temperatures, which can also lead to ice melt around the coastal continent. But it also goes along with warm temperatures, will then mean melting ice, the glaciers from above. All of this is not good news. We're going to lose some of the sea ice, which is not helpful, but also the land ice is going to lead to increasing sea levels. And we are expecting more of the melt in the months to come.
What is this caused by, do you reckon? Are we talking human activity here, the emission of greenhouse gases, for instance?
It is very clearly the fingerprint of human activities. Is by increasing CO2 and equivalent greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the planetary temperature is rising. We've documented that over the last 40, 50 years. It's accelerating right now. And now on top of that, we have these extreme events which happen once in a while in some regions, and that gives us these record warm temperatures. But none of this can be explained by natural climate variability on its own. This is a clear fingerprint of human-induced CO2 emissions and then global warming.
OK, so what happens to life underwater? The plants, coral reefs, fish. Hotter water means less oxygen, of course.
Yes, though there's a couple of different stressors on the ecosystem. Warming is one of them. And such warm temperatures as for the marine ecosystem also not seen. So we don't exactly know what will happen. Typically, fish, the more mobile species, can move towards the polar regions to escape it a little bit. Certainly, dwellers which live on the seafloor cannot. We're expecting seeing some damages and losses in coral reefs. We've seen whenever we have extreme warmings, a lot of the corals gets hurt. We call this coral bleaching, but other species might well be expected. But Ben, we're out of the range of the normal, out of the range of what we experience. So it's a little bit tough to forecast precisely what will happen during these extreme events. We'll have a close watch on this, but I'm expecting some unseen changes to the ecosystem in the next couple of months.
The other worrying thing is that the hotter the water, the less carbon dioxide that can be stored there. So are we talking about the beginning of a cycle that we can't get back out of?
That's correct. So when the ocean takes up about 28% of the human emitted carbon dioxide, in that sense, it makes it less warm than it would have been otherwise. But the solution of seawater is temperature dependent. Warmer waters can take up less of the CO2, also less oxygen. And on top of that, also the stratification in the ocean will increase, circulation will slow down. All of this means less carbon dioxide will be taken up by the ocean. And that means more will be remaining in the atmosphere, which will then accelerate climate warming. So in that sense, it's a feedback loop that we don't really want to get into very deeply.
Martin, let's talk about the weather. After all, ocean currents do play a central role in weather patterns. What could all of this create? Are we talking more extreme weather events, which we've been reporting on so often this year and in the past months?
Yes, there's an expectation that warmer sea surface temperatures get responded to in the atmosphere, and that normally means there's more evaporation. That means more moisture in the atmosphere, which means heavier rainfall. So we're expecting extreme events with more downpours. We've seen some of that already in Europe, but also in the more Mediterranean type of climate, warmer temperatures also mean warmer lower air, and that means for them more dry condition and forest fires. So you see both sides. You see droughts in one regions and extreme events and flooding in other regions. So warm temperatures enable that, let's say, extreme events in the atmosphere very specifically. So it is something to be concerned of in addition to the local effects in the warming regions.
Yeah, there are also economic effects, aren't there? I mean, fishing centres, fishing villages, shipping. Do ships need to take new routes now if we see a change in the way that our seas work and the cycles? Cities close to the sea and of course, warmer waters mean rising levels, like I mentioned before.
Yeah, we will see. The shipping might be the least of my worries, but in the coastal regions, we are finding warm beaches, so some visitors might like that, but we might also have algae and also harmful and toxic algae happening more frequently, which is not a good development. Losing some of the marine ecosystem, key iconic species, is not good for economics as well, not only for fisheries, but also for tourism. On the longer run, we're going to see rising sea levels, which is a problem for ports, for all the infrastructure, for small islands, coral reefs. We are expecting a loss of oxygen. We already documented that in the ocean, that on the longer run means big fish will have to go shallower to get the same amount of oxygen. So big changes are upon us, and it's the multi-stressors, the pollution, the climate change, loss of oxygen, and also ocean acidification due to increased carbon dioxide. All of this is stresses on the ecosystem, and all of this is not good for us near the ocean.
So, Martin, what do we do?
I think the message is very clear. We've been in the expert community over the last 20 years saying that climate change will be a problem. It's real, it's happening, it will have a lot of economic impacts, and now we're seeing the first telltale signs unfolding itself. So what is clearly needs to be done is to stop emitting CO2, maybe even where possible, reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere by capturing it. This can be a nature-based solution like planting trees, like also algae in the ocean, seagrass. And I think we have to take that very serious because it's going to be worse and worse for the years to come. So I think it only behooves us to really become serious about mitigating the effect of climate change. That means decarbonizing our energy system, decarbonizing our transport system, all the things that are well known around the world, but they need to be done.
Martin, it's also the United Nations Decade of the Oceans, which I know you're involved in. What's the UN actually doing about this?
So at the UN, we started in 2021 this UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, precisely preparing the communities around the world for these type of options. So they want to understand what is climate change, what is ocean change, how can we adapt to it on the one hand, and how can we mitigate it, but also how can we have a sustainable blue economy, fisheries, tourism and the like, but on the one hand, but also protection on the other hand. So it's this area of complex negotiations for coastal states, for coastal communities, which don't always are experts. So the scientists are providing information, make it decision relevant, so they can come up with decision support system for governments, for stakeholders, for the industry to really come into more sustainable human-ocean interactions.
The world's oceans are warmer than they have been in our history. Thank you very much for filling us in on some of the solutions and predictions there. Martin Visbeck from the GEOMAR Ocean Research Center in Kiel.
Thank you, Ben.